But it doesn't mean that each of us have to be some big superhero. If each of us is brave in just a little way, if we're all a little bit brave, we're going to get through this. So I'm Kelly Morrison. I represent Minnesota's 3rd District in Congress. I'm an OBGYN by training, and I was in the Minnesota legislature for 6 years before I was elected to Congress.
There are a bunch of things I want to talk about, but I have celiac disease, and so the Adina Act is incredibly important to me. I've almost died before because I was given drugs that had gluten in it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I currently need birth control pills because I have endometriosis. My doctor thinks that there's some birth control that I could use, but it says we don't think it contains gluten, but we can't promise you. So I know why the Adina Act is important to me, but what made you want to introduce it?
Well, I mean, you just laid it out for us so well. I mean, that's a case in point of how it's so important if you have allergies to know exactly what is in the medication before you take it. I'm inspired by this incredible constituent of mine who is this young woman who had an anaphylactic reaction to an antibiotic. She was away from home at camp, and it was really scary. And she almost lost her life. And she has just become this warrior to make sure that people are protected in this way. And so the Adina Act is named after her. That's her name. And she and her incredible parents have been just incredible advocates for people with allergies and pushing the pharmaceutical companies to include this important information on labels.
Yeah, it's amazing. Other countries can do it, but we have some problem with it.
It's sort of a theme sometimes.
Oh, yeah, it seems to be a theme with a lot of things that happen in this country. How did they get in touch with you? How did they get your attention? Because there are a lot of people who say, there's nothing I can do to change the world. And it seems like she did exactly that.
Yeah, she sure did. Well, she got in touch with my predecessor, so I can't take full credit. She's done this all. So she tracked down my predecessor, Dean Phillips. They introduced this legislation together, got bipartisan support. Unfortunately, it was not passed into law. So when I replaced Representative Phillips, I spoke with them during the campaign. They told me about the bill. And of course, as a physician, I was interested and so impressed by Adina and her parents, and was just really honored that they wanted me to continue to carry the torch with them. So that's how I got involved.
I hope it can be passed into law this time because there's been a Modernization Act for medicine introduced since 2011.
Oh, it's so
And
frustrating.
yeah. And every time it gets the bipartisan support, but it doesn't get enough support. And then everyone's just like, well, it's not that important. And it dies in committee. And this has just happened over and over again. And I'm really hoping now that a name is attached that maybe this will be different.
I hope so too. I hope so too. I'm very motivated. It's a tough environment, you may have noticed in Congress right now, but we've got to persevere. We have big challenges like threats to democracy, but that doesn't mean we can't stop doing all of the work that needs to be done on behalf of the American people and people like Adina and you.
Do you have any suggestions for like how to get members of Congress to care and to sign on and to make it a priority?
Oh my gosh. I mean, advocacy by constituents is really powerful because representatives tend to be most responsive to their constituents, people who live in the district that they represent. So setting up meetings with them, setting up Zoom meetings, even better, setting up in-person meetings. And sometimes it can be with their staff. Ideally, obviously, it's with the representative themselves, because there's nothing more powerful than an individual person sharing their story and really bringing it to life for someone who maybe doesn't have any experience with something like this, to bring it to life so that they understand the human impact of why this is so important. So if people are willing to do that, that is the best kind of advocacy.
Do you have any stories of constituents that have come to you to say, this is something that matters to me and that has really stuck with you and you're going to fight for?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I have so many examples of that from my time in the Minnesota legislature. I actually just was doing an interview. They asked me, what's a really meaningful thing that's on your office wall to you? And I have a bill that I led in the Minnesota legislature called the Reproductive Freedom Defense Act, which is Minnesota's shield law. So it protects patients and providers from prosecution from repressive laws in other states so that people can receive care that is legal in Minnesota without repercussions, and their providers can provide that care for them without repercussions, which is incredibly important, of course, in the wake of the Dobbs decision and all the abortion bans that have popped up around the country. So I was incredibly proud as the only OBGYN in the Minnesota legislature to lead that effort. And that was brought to me by a group of patients and providers. And obviously, it felt like a really natural fit. Um, but a fun example is a constituent who's very passionate about protecting pollinators. Um, and she brought a bill to me about doing just that. And we created a program in Minnesota called Lawns to Legumes. And it's a micro grant program that helps people transform their traditional lawns into pollinator friendly habitats. Because we've had a precipitous decline in pollinator populations, especially bees in Minnesota, but across the country as well. And of course, pollinators are key to our food supply. So, as go pollinators, go the rest of us. So, they're really important. And there's some really compelling scientific research that if you create corridors of a pollinator friendly habitat in urban and suburban areas, you really can bolster the population. So we got that passed into law, and it's been incredibly popular in Minnesota, and it's really actually making a difference. That's kind of exciting. There's stuff like that. I've had patients trying to advocate for better access to in vitro fertilization. That was an effort that we worked on in Minnesota too. That was actually a campaign promise to President Trump's. That unfortunately just yesterday he said, actually, we can't do that. So there's another campaign promise that is apparently not going to be fulfilled, but that doesn't mean that we can't continue to fight for it. So there are lots of examples of, oh my gosh, another one actually in Congress. I could talk for hours because constituents have the best ideas because they're the ideas that come from real life, right? So this one is called Love Lives On, and it's to make sure that veteran spouses, so if you are married to a member of the military who dies in the course of service, that you are still able to receive the benefits that your family earned, even if you remarry. So people used to not be able to access their benefits if they remarried. So it's sort of this cruel thing where you weren't able to continue living, sort of. So that's a cool effort. My husband's an Army combat veteran, so that feels kind of personal to me. And I think it's so important that people be able to, continue to live. I think most of us would want our partner to have a happy life after we were gone if we were taken prematurely. So that's a fun effort too.
How much of it is going to be able to be at a nationwide or attempt at a nationwide?
Well, the Love Lives On Act is in Congress, and that one I have introduced. The pollinator one, I'll have to look into what that would look like on a national level. We're playing so much defense right now that unfortunately it's hard to think about positive policy changes. 'Cause there's so much coming at all of us all the time with the threats to democracy and the rule of law, cuts to essential health services, veterans care. It's pretty overwhelming. So there's a lot of defense being played, but we're in the August work period right now in district. So that creates a little brain space to start thinking about things like that. So, renewing my efforts on the Adina Act, for example, is one of the things that I hope to do this month.
What things are you doing this month? What things are you doing to fight back? What things are you doing to get in touch with your constituents, other than like the basic of like town halls and stuff like that?
Yeah, doing all that for sure. Going to senior centers. I met with a group of superintendents in my district this morning, um, who it's interesting. They are usually studiously very nonpartisan. They are so scared right now about everything that's happening and the impacts. I mean, and the list is so long. First of all, there's obviously the Department of Education, their ongoing effort to meet the needs of kids who special ed kids and their general population kids, because the federal government has never lived up to its promise of funding for special ed services, making sure that every child is able to access the education. That's the law that they deserve. Threats with vouchers and, now there's this effort to blur public education with religious education, making religious schools public schools. Threats to, of course, the cuts to Medicaid, the cuts to SNAP, ICE raids, and what that means for immigrant children. Like, it's pretty overwhelming, and they are really scared. They're really scared for their kids. They're scared for their staff. They're scared for what all this means for the future of the country. So that was a pretty powerful meeting this morning. I had a press conference this morning with our sheriff in Hennepin County here in Minnesota and a couple of the chiefs of police. We introduced, this is actually a bipartisan effort called Pathways to Policing that helps to recruit people with sort of non-traditional backgrounds into law enforcement. So that law enforcement reflects the communities that they serve better, so that people who, aren't traditionally drawn to law enforcement or don't follow sort of a traditional path are able to do that. So all kinds of different efforts going. I'm going to Farm Fest tomorrow. Minnesota has a big agricultural presence, not so much in my district, but it's really important in our state. So I'm going to go hear from farmers tomorrow. There's just something new every day. Let me tell you, if you like being a student, being in Congress is a great job because there is no end to the amount of things that you can learn. We live in a really fantastic, diverse, vibrant country, and I love it dearly and am worried profoundly about it right now. So I'm more motivated than ever to do everything that I can to protect our democracy so that this great American experiment can continue.
I have a few series, and one of my series is Three Wins Today, where I tell people good things happening at small levels. And so many of the things that I cover, you don't expect to be considered wins because in another lifetime, when Biden was president, they would just be, oh, this is just what's happening. But you meeting with the superintendents would just be, oh, you meeting with the superintendents. But now it's a whole different level and it's a whole different fight than it's ever been before.
It's so true. It is so true. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately when we think about, because I think a lot of people are saying, what do we do? Like, what can I, as an individual person, do in this moment? And I really think that it comes down to little things, because it is going to require all of us to stand up together and say, this will not stand. But it doesn't mean that each of us have to be some big superhero. If each of us is brave in just a little way, if we're all a little bit brave, we're going to get through this. It doesn't mean that we have to, go tie ourselves to something or give up our whole lives, but there are little things we can each do. And if we're all doing that, we're going to get through this. So I feel optimistic because I think there are a lot of people who weren't with this president to begin with. And I think there are a lot of people who may have voted for him, but think this is not what I thought I was voting for. And so we have to find ways to welcome those people into to the other side or to a new coalition that stands for what I think most people think are American values.
Do you have any stories or any situations where you've talked to Republicans in your district and how those conversations have gone? Have they been more receptive than you thought?
Yeah, I serve on the small business community, I mean, small business committee, and I meet with the small business community. But I spent last week just in anticipation of the president announcing his latest round of tariffs. And I met with a ton of small businesses in my district. And, some of them I have no idea what their politics are, but I think some of them are probably more conservative leaning. And they're all really profoundly concerned about the impact of these tariffs on, of course, on their individual business, but also on the broader economy and the implications for our country, because they are profound. And so that is an interesting, I mean, that's sort of an area where I think we can find a lot of common ground that this isn't good for business and it's also not good for our country. Business people understand that you need the rule of law for business to thrive. It's been an assumed thing in our American system for so long that it's sort of unimaginable, I think, to a lot of people that we may be losing that. And I think there are a lot of sort of conservative leaning people who are saying, gee, that's not great. I think the immigration raids are another area where people are thinking, well, we talked about deporting violent criminals, but now we're deporting grandmas and parents who have lived here for decades, who have no criminal record, who are tax-paying members of our communities, and we're deporting some of them to third countries. Like, what is going on? And we have ICE agents walking around without identification and wearing face masks. This does not feel like the America that I think most people think of when they think of our country. I don't think that makes most Americans proud to watch that and to have our president playing up alligator Alcatraz. I always think about our kids and young people, and you got to have leaders that model behavior that you'd want your children to have. And this president is almost always the opposite of that. We need leaders that show strength, of course, but compassion and empathy. And I think that's just so, so important right now to not normalize this behavior and to make sure that we are promoting and electing leaders who model that kind of behavior.
It's it's amazing what's happening and how a kid can't just look up to the person who's in charge of the country and learn how to be a human. And that's how it's supposed to be. Even when it's in a Republican, there's still this idea of you can look up to the president to see someone who stands tall and who respects the person they're talking to at the very least.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the reasons I ran for office in the first place. I ran in the wake of the 2016 campaign and election. I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I grew up in a kind of primarily Republican family. And I grew up in one of those families where we debated politics around the dinner table. And it could get heated. I can still hear my dad's voice in my head saying, Kelly, cite your source. He was always very skeptical of my pronouncements. But, at the end of the day, we still loved each other. We still respected each other. And I like to think that sometimes we learn something from each other. So that campaign, to find ourselves in this place where your political affiliation equates with your morality and your worth as a person, was just so disorienting to me personally, and I think so dangerous for our country. And to see our country get ripped apart like that, I was just compelled to get involved. I mean, I was an OBGYN. I had never thought of running for office before. And that really compelled me to try to get involved and be a bridge builder. And so I just think we've got to keep doing that. We've got to keep welcoming people. We've got to stay away from being mean to each other. It's like the basic rules from kindergarten, the golden rule: treat other people the way you want to be treated. And othering people the way this president does is just,
Yeah.
it's terrible. And it's not what kids, and frankly, it's not what adults, he gives adults permission to lean into not their better angels. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah.
You are currently with the other doctors in the Democratic caucus on a doctor's caucus, which sounds
Yeah.
amazing, and I'd love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, I'm really proud that we finally had a critical mass of Democratic doctors in Congress. This is the first time we doubled our numbers. There's 6 of us this year. 3 of us were elected last year. Um, and so we formed the Democratic Doctors Caucus. We've come from all across the country and a variety of specialties. We've got emergency medicine, pediatrics, OBGYN, pulmonary critical care, and internal medicine. And we're from Oregon and California and Minnesota and New Jersey. It's kind of cool. And we were formed, obviously, in this moment where we were really leaning into trying to protect Medicaid, because, of course, we all understand acutely how many of our patients are going to be harmed when they lose access to healthcare. And it's interesting, there's been a GOP Doctors Caucus for a while, and they were formed to oppose the Affordable Care Act. So it's weird that we have, of course, in common this experience of taking care of patients, but we have just really different philosophical approaches to access to care, I think. And so one of the first things that we did was hold a press conference to explain our opposition to the nomination of RFK Jr. to be Secretary of Health and Human Services, and just explained our deep reservations about this person who has profited off of sowing mis and disinformation about vaccines and about mental health care and about reproductive health care, and has no medical or scientific background and has no experience running a large organization. And unfortunately, our fears have been borne out, and he has he's done a lot of damage in the short time that he's been in that position. So we feel really strongly that we need to speak out about the attacks on healthcare from this administration and these majorities in the House and the Senate, and also try to uh, offer and spread good evidence-based medical information when bad information comes out of this administration. So I'm really proud to be a founding member of the caucus. I'm really proud of my colleagues. And it's a tough moment to be here, but I'm grateful to all of them to be able to stand together at this time that's just really challenging.
What is it like to be the only pro reproductive rights OBGYN, but there are two Republicans? Like, have you talked to them at all?
Yeah, it's weird to there have been a lot of OBGYNs in Congress, actually. I think there's something like eight or something like that. None has ever been a pro reproductive rights, pro choice OBGYN, which is really weird because that does not reflect the profession. Overwhelmingly, OBGYNs, of course, are pro choice because we understand on a firsthand basis how important it is that people have access to comprehensive reproductive health care. And so it's weird and it's disheartening. I have not spoken to the two who are currently um, in office. But I feel a, a responsibility and a duty really to speak very clearly about reproductive health care, particularly in this just frightening time in the wake of the Dobbs decision. And we're seeing more and more attacks on access, still more bad information coming out of Congress, the president, the executive, as well as the Supreme Court, VA limiting access for our active military to reproductive health care and veterans. It kind of goes on and on. And now we're seeing, threats to contraception. It's a very dire moment. It's really important that we stand together, speak very clearly, and it's really important that people support organizations that support the values that they hold dear. That's another thing that people can do. I think about the cuts to Planned Parenthood layered onto the Medicaid cuts. Planned Parenthood has played such an important role in filling in some gaps in our kind of fractured healthcare system. And now that Planned Parenthood, these cuts are probably going to shut down about 200 Planned Parenthood clinics across the country. And my heart absolutely breaks when I think about the people who are going to have literally nowhere to turn. They're going to lose their Medicaid. They're not going to be able to go to a Planned Parenthood that often has kind of a sliding scale payment system. It's a very scary moment, and we've got to stay strong. We've got to stand together, and we've got to get through to the future where we can pass better legislation, and we have the resources in our society to make sure that we're all taken care of. And we need to get back to that place. Actually, I don't like saying get back to that place. We need to move forward to a place uh, where we recognize that we live in community. Paul Wellstone was our one of our senators from Minnesota, and he always used to say, "We all do better when we all do better." And it's so true. That's what public health is about. That's what living in community is about, and it's just true. So I think I'm an optimist. I'm half full always. This is a difficult time. We have work to do. People will be harmed. I mean, we have to be clear-eyed about that, but we're going to get through this. We're going to create a better future together. I really believe that.
Okay, one last question I have to ask. The DNC chair is Minnesotan. Ken Martin, I think he's amazing. What is something that people might not know about Ken Martin that you can share as someone who worked more closely with him?
Oh my gosh, Ken is wonderful. He is so passionate about getting Democrats elected. He believes in our party. He believes in our candidates. I think the big thing about Ken is just how much he cares. He has just a gigantic heart, and he cares about our country, he cares about the party, and he just is a believer in democratic values and what we stand for. Um, and he's a really sweet person, honestly. He's kind of a fighter, but he's also kind of a softie.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly. This has been wonderful, and I hope
Thank
we get to do
you.
it again.
I hope so too. What a pleasure. Thanks so much.
All right.
Take care.